So we're going to spend some time talking about Lego. I'm a business school professor, but I spent 5 years of my life wandering around the world of Lego. And I got to know the company very well, and it's an interesting story because what I'm going to talk about is not the toy, but the company. And so we're going to talk about innovation. But we're going to talk about it from one company's perspective. And often when you hear talks about innovation, you'll hear stories about companies that didn't innovate, like encyclopedias, or like film cameras, or the BlackBerry, or taxis, and how all these companies got disrupted by online search and digital cameras and the iPhone and of course, Uber. But this is not a story about that. This is a story about and there's tons of books. Every week there's a new book about disruption, but this is not a story about disruption. The book I wrote is actually about a company that failed at disruption, and failed not once, not twice, but every single time that they tried to disrupt, they failed. But they learned something from that failure. This is their entire sales history in one chart, from their founding in 1932 up until their most recent reported financial year. And you can see that they almost went bankrupt in 2003. That they experimented with disruptive innovation and almost went bankrupt in 2003. That because of their attempts to revolutionize the toy industry, they almost went out of business. But they learned something from that failure. And after putting in their new way of innovating, they came back stronger than ever. Their 9-year average annual sales growth has been 20%, and their 9-year average annual profit growth has been almost 30%, without doing anything revolutionary or disruptive. And so I'm going to tell you this story. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by innovation. You know, if I went around this room, if you asked each other about your definitions of innovation, we get a lot of different definitions. How we define it can be very different. And so I want to just ask you, what's your definition of innovation? And we're going to do it just through a simple survey. I'm just going to ask you to raise your hands if you think this is an innovation. And I'm going to show you some things and ask you, by your definition, is this an innovation? And I'm going to start with a hard one. The iPod came out in 2001, of course, was not the first music player without removable media, like cassettes or discs. There was the Diamond Rio that had flash memory before the iPod. Just raise your hand. How many of you would say that the iPod was an innovation? Okay, 73.2%. How many would say that it's not? A few of you, okay. Yeah, and often the reason that people say that it's not an innovation is because there was something there before. Maybe it's an incremental improvement, but it's not something big and new. Whereas the people that say that it is an innovation often say that, well, yes, but it was easier to work with. It had more storage, a new interface, a great marketing plan, and of course it connected to iTunes, which was the service that went along with it. Now, iTunes, of course, in 2003 came out and lets you buy not a whole CD, but just one song at a time. How many of you would say that iTunes was an innovation? Okay, again, most of you. So a service can be an innovation. And it also was an innovation in business model, right? I mean, you could buy one song at a time. You didn't have to buy the whole album. Okay, how about the digital camera? I think most of us would say that this is an innovation, right? Even though it wasn't new to take pictures, we've been taking pictures for a century, it was a new way of taking pictures. So it was a new way of doing an old thing. My question is not, is this an innovation, but it's this. Yeah? The Egg McMuffin. So the Egg McMuffin, whereas the digital camera was a new way of doing an old thing, the Egg McMuffin was an old way of doing a new thing. And let me explain. In the late 60s in Southern California, there was a McDonald's franchise. And the owner of that franchise wondered, why are we not open during breakfast. We're open for dinner and lunch, but not breakfast. And we're really good at making sandwiches and putting them, wrapping them up, putting them in a warming tray, and serving them to people that come up to the counter. Why don't we make a breakfast sandwich? So he started making that. People loved it. He told the corporate headquarters from McDonald's. They promptly threatened to yank his franchise license because he was breaking the rules. But of course, smarter heads prevailed, and they rolled it out across the country. And now you can get breakfast in the U.S. 24 hours a day. What was unique about the Egg McMuffin was not how they did it. It was basically making a fast food sandwich. But of course, making a breakfast sandwich made them compete against an entirely different set of competitors and serve a different set of customers. How many of you would say that the Egg McMuffin was an innovation? Okay, again, not a new way of doing something, but an old way of doing a new thing. All right, the Swiss Army knife. I don't know if you know what was new or different about the Swiss Army knife. It was the first knife that had a spring mechanism that let you put devices on both sides of the knife. My question is not, is this an innovation, but is this? $1,400. It has 87 different tools, 25 screwdrivers, Allen wrenches, pliers, fingernail clippers, compass. How many of you would say that that's an innovation? A few of you, okay. Well, if that's an innovation, is this an innovation? Is this an innovation? This is to help you with the Control-Alt-Delete key on the IBM PC. These are creative ideas, but are they innovative ideas? And what's the difference between creativity and innovation? Is there a difference? Right? I mean, no, it doesn't work. Don't try this at home. It doesn't work. But is there a difference? And, the difference is that innovation is about practical and useful ideas that are also creative and new, right? It has to be of value to somebody. All right, let me give you another example. ING Direct. Now, ING Direct started in 1997 in Canada, and the idea of ING Direct was that we would be your other bank. And so you have a bank that you use to pay your bills, and there's probably a branch nearby, and there's ATMs to get cash, and they give you a credit card. ING Direct said, no, we're your other bank. We're not going to have branches. We're not going to have ATMs. We're not going to have current accounts. We just are a very simple bank that if you have a couple of $1,000, you can put them in the bank and they'll earn a higher rate of interest, or we'll give you simple loans for cars or houses that will give you a lower rate on, because we don't have all that back office. We don't handle lots of paper. We don't handle cash. We don't have branches on every street corner. And so our cost of operation is about 1/10 of a traditional bank. Now, if you call up ING Direct, they'll answer the phone. If you keep calling, they'll actually make you wait longer to discourage you from calling, because it costs quite a lot to answer the phone. And if you keep calling, they'll actually fire you. They'll send you your money back because they say, we don't want a relationship with you. We want to be your other bank. We just want you to send us your money and then leave us alone. That we want to be your low-cost other bank. And so, but they offer much higher rates on savings and lower rates on loans, and are the fastest growing bank in history. How many would say that that different business model is an innovation? Okay, so that counts. All right, one more story. Sildenafil. Sildenafil was a drug to treat heart pain. The technical term is angina. And it went through the early phase trials, the animal trials, the human trials. They gave it to people with heart pain, and it didn't work. And so somebody from Pfizer was asked to get the samples back, and they had trouble getting them back. People didn't want to give them back. And they found that there was actually an unanticipated but not unpleasant side effect. They investigated that, and they reintroduced the drug as Viagra. It became a multi-billion-dollar drug, complete accident. How many of you would say that was an innovation? A couple of very enthusiastic hands go up on that. And I find, actually, when I did the research on this, I learned that if you put Viagra in fresh flowers, they don't wilt as quickly. Absolutely true. So I show you these because the question is an important one. And that question is what we're here to talk about, which is, what is innovation? Because the way you define innovation, you as innovation leaders, as management, the way you define it affects what you ask for, where you look for it, what you reward, and what kind of innovation you get. And too often, we only look for that disruptive, revolutionary innovation. And you can fall into that trap that Lego did that almost put them out of business. And so I like a broader definition of innovation. An innovation is a new match between a solution and a need that creates value. It doesn't have to be a new solution or technology. It doesn't have to be a new need. But if we can bring those together more effectively, then that's an innovation. I would argue that the iPod was a fairly incremental innovation, right? It was a well-integrated set of incremental improvements over what was already there. And innovation doesn't have to be some big patentable invention. Innovation can be an incremental improvement, and those count and can be tremendously valuable. And it also sounds like we all agree that they can be products or services or financial models, business models, internal processes, that those count as innovation. And of course, it may or may not be profitable. Some innovations start out as unprofitable and over time become more profitable. iTunes as a service was not profitable for Apple. They were using that to sell more iPods and, of course, more Macs, right? So even though most of you felt that iTunes was an innovation, it was not a profitable innovation, but it overall made Apple more profitable. Now, I'm a business school professor, so it's in my contract I have to show you a matrix, and I'll try not to make it too painful. But you can think about innovation as being more or less radical in terms of the technology, the method, the process. So along the horizontal axis here, you can think about the technology as being something that we understand very well. That would be over on the left side. And then on the right side is the more radical, disruptive technologies that nobody's used before. And those can give you tremendous advantage, but also can be tremendously risky. And then the vertical dimension here, you can see that maybe it's serving a group of customers who you know quite well. Or it's going up and finding those latent needs, those blue ocean opportunities. That would be at the top part of the matrix, those needs that nobody else is serving. And if we can serve them, we'll have the market to ourselves. And you can innovate anywhere in the matrix. The digital camera, of course, was a new way of doing an old thing. We're still taking pictures. We're just doing it in a very different way. The Egg McMuffin, I would argue, was very much of a blue ocean type of thing. It was an innovation that was not a new way of doing something, but let McDonald's serve a new market. And I put a 3D printer up in the upper right. That was the technology's changing all the time. We're not quite sure what it's going to mean and what the applications are, but it's moving very rapidly. And I would argue that the iPod, in fact, was down in here, that it wasn't much new in terms of technology or market, but of course it was new for Apple. And it was a challenge for Apple, but of course a very profitable one in the end. Now, often we hear at this stage in a talk about innovation that if all we do is incremental improvement of current products for current customers, then we're going to become bankrupt or irrelevant. And that we have to innovate, we have to disrupt, we have to change our industry before somebody else does, because if we don't, then we'll be left behind, and we'll be the ones like Kodak, like BlackBerry, that are left behind. Well, I think that's a very dangerous way to think about innovation, that kind of binary decision, do we do incremental or radical, sustaining or revolutionary? That's the trap that Lego fell into. And Lego, because they fell in that trap, almost went out of business in 2003. And so I'm going to tell you the story of Lego, and we'll start at the beginning. And because Lego, they did quite well for many years just putting out another box of bricks. And then they fell into this trap of revolutionary disruption in the late 90s and early 2000s. and that almost put them out of business. But they did discover something that I call the third way, which is neither incremental nor radical, that has led to their tremendous success over the last 9 years. And so we'll start at the beginning. This unhappy-looking man on the right here is Ole Kirk Christensen. He started up Lego in the midst of the Depression. He was a carpenter that couldn't get enough wood to build furniture, which is what he'd been trained to do, so he just took scraps of wood to build toys. Built very good toys, grew the company slowly and steadily. In 1946, he invested in this very disruptive new technology of injection molding and came out with the first plastic toys in 1947. They were complete failures. Nobody liked them. He had 4 sons. His 2 eldest sons actually later left the company to start up a competing company to make wooden toys because they were convinced that their father was going in the wrong direction. So they started up a competitor. He left the company to his 3rd-born son, who began experimenting with the plastic brick and patented that plastic brick in 1958, and slowly and steadily converted all of the toys to the brick over the next couple years. And the company grew quite well, quite successfully, although slowly, up until the late 70s. In the late 70s, the founder of the company, the son of the founder, the guy in the upper right, turned it over to his son, the grandson of the founder. Now, that guy had been very frustrated by his father. His father was very conservative, never took out a loan. The grandson tells a story about how it took him 6 years to convince his father to put the color green in the inventory, to make green bricks. Just very frustrated. So when he took over the company in the late 70s, he unleashed a flood of innovation that changed Lego into the company that we know today. One of those innovations was Duplo. It had been hanging around since the late 60s, but he put some marketing muscle behind it, made it its own business unit, branded it with the Red Rabbit. Duplo, of course, is the bigger bricks for younger kids, right? So 2 to 4-year-olds can play with Lego, and you don't have to worry about them swallowing it. At the other end, so he moves Lego down to the younger end, and he thinks about, well, how could we move Lego up to the more mature kid? The kids tend to leave Lego at age 9 or 10. Why don't we make a more sophisticated Lego so that teenagers can play with Lego? So he comes out with Technique, which has gears and beams and motors and axles, and thinking, well, teenagers now will play with it because it's much more sophisticated. And for the most part, that fails. The teenagers don't play with Lego. But there's a group of 25 to 55-year-old men that do, and so this toy continues to do quite well to this day. But I think the biggest innovation in Lego in this period is the minifigure. This is the first minifigure in 1978, and it changes the play experience completely. It lets you immerse yourself in the play. People 45 and older like me, we didn't have the minifigure. We just had a box of bricks. Younger people, you know what it's like, or if you've seen your kids, they can kind of act out little dramas. And so the minifigure changes Lego dramatically. And the fourth big innovation that happens during this period is the first fantasy sets. Lego before 1978 was always set in present-day towns. So it was things like fire trucks and police stations and hospitals and gas stations. These fantasy sets of castles and space were tremendously popular. And so Lego went on a period of 15 years of 14% annual growth. They doubled in size every 5 years for 15 years. It was a golden period in Lego's history. And then it stopped. Sales flattened in the mid-90s. And let me ask you, think what would you do? So you're the grandson of the founder. You control this company. The company is located in this tiny little town of Billund, Denmark. It's located 3 hours from anything. I mean, there's 3 hours of nothing in every direction. It's a company town. You basically control the company. And so you've got to decide what to do. You've had a very successful 15-year run. What would you do? Well, what a lot of companies do is they say if one new toy, one new product is good, then 2 new products is better. And so what Lego did over the next 5 years, between 94 and 98, they tripled the number of toys. They went from 109 in 1994 to 347. I got the catalogs, I counted, and they tripled the number of toys, but sales didn't go anywhere. And what do you think happens to profits? Right? They have their first loss in company history. They have to lay off 1,000 people. Bill in Denmark today is only 6,000 people. The whole town is only 6,000 people. They're laying off 1,000 people. The grandson of the founder who controls the company is literally laying off the children of his friends. The parents of his children's friends. And so it's very traumatic. And so he takes a deep look at things, and he says, I've been running this company for 20 years. 15 of them very well, but not very well for the last 5. Maybe I'm not the right person to run it for the next 5, next 10. And he brings in a turnaround expert, a guy from outside Lego who's just turned around another company in Denmark very successfully. And that guy goes out and he looks at the market, and what he sees is that the market has changed, that the way kids are playing has changed, that in fact it's not the traditional toys, but they're moving to things like, Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox. And the distribution channel has changed. It's no longer the mom and pop toy store that Lego can say, here's what you should carry, but it's a very sophisticated retailer. And almost all of the toys you could buy instead of Lego have moved their production to China. So other toys are getting less expensive. And in the United States, Lego's largest market, Lego is actually getting more expensive because the Danish kroner is getting stronger against the dollar. And the Lego patents have expired. And so anywhere you go to buy Lego, there's a brick that'll snap together with Lego for half the price. I mean, this is a terrible market. What would you do? What would you do? Right? It's not going to work to come out with another box of bricks. And so Lego fell into this trap of disruptive innovation. We've got to invent the future before somebody else does. We've got to come up with something new and different, or else we're going to be left behind. We're going to become bankrupt or irrelevant. The brick is passé. And I'll ask you later, was that wrong? That if all they offer was another box of bricks, they're going to become bankrupt or irrelevant? So what they did is they went off and they started innovating. I think if you raise the PC, then this will reach it better. There's a problem with there we go. They come up with a new mission statement. And they say, we want the Lego brand to become the world's strongest brand among families with children by 2005. This comes out in 2000. And they begin challenging their people to reinvent the future of play. They say it's not enough to come out with a box of bricks. One of the things that they do is this new play experience called Galador. So they go out to Hollywood, they commission a TV show about Galador, Defenders of the Outer Dimension. And they get an action figure, and they actually embed electronics in the action figure, so that if you watch the TV show with your action figure, it'll talk back to the TV show. They commission a video game, they commission a spaceship with little electronic games on it, and so they try and create this whole new play experience. They do some surveys, some market research, and they find out actually that most kids don't like construction toys. And so this may seem like a very traditional Lego toy, but it wasn't. This was actually a very blue ocean type of thing in terms of they were trying to create a toy for kids that don't like the building experience much, but like the play experience. And so this only had 15 or 20 big, chunky pieces that you could snap together quickly, and then you could play around with this hero that had adventures. This was a fire rescue set. They explored electronic toys. So the one on the left here was a toy that a toddler would drag behind him, and it would play a different song depending on what you plugged into the middle. The one on the right would tell a different story depending on how you plugged the cards in. They had a Legoland theme park, and if you've ever been to a Legoland, you know it's a different type of theme park. The rides are more gentle. It's more targeted to that 5 to 9-year-old demographic than traditional theme parks, which have scarier rides. So they open up new theme parks in the UK, in California, and in Germany. They come out with this. I mean, this is a box of plastic pieces that snap together, but it's nothing like any Lego set before or since. So the Bionicle set. They even explore building with Lego with no plastic bricks. They come out with a 3-dimensional virtual building environment where you can put together Lego by grabbing them from a pallet and snapping them together virtually on your computer, and then they later connect it to a fulfillment system, so if you upload your design, they'll send you just the bricks you need to build it. And lastly, and it may not seem like a big departure, but it was actually a very big departure for Lego. For the first time in 1999, they attached their toys to somebody else's story. 1999 was the first movie in the second trilogy for Star Wars, right? It was Episode 1. And that's the first Lego Star Wars toys. 2 years later, in 2001, is the first Harry Potter movie, and it's the Lego Harry Potter toys. And those toys were very new. You know, being in that market was very new for Lego. And it all worked until it didn't. They almost went bankrupt in 2003 and 2004. The fall from the peak of 10.1 billion Danish kroner in 2001 to 6.3 in 2004 is almost 40%, and the company almost went bankrupt. What happened was, in some cases, I think they came up with good toys. I think this would have been a very good toy if it had Fisher-Price or some other brand. But they tried to sell it into department stores, and people would look at it, both the buyers and the end customers, and they'd see this toy, and they'd see the Lego brand, and they'd get kind of confused. You know, this isn't a Lego toy. A brand is a great thing, but it lets you do some things and not others. And of course, reaching too far outside the brand hurt them here. Jack Stone, you know, this is, again, the toy that had lots of, just a very few chunky pieces so that you could snap it together quickly. And, you know, looking back on it, if you make a toy, a construction toy for kids that don't like construction toys, it's not going to go well, right? Kids that don't like construction toys aren't going to buy it. And the kids that did buy it ended up disappointed, right? They were expecting to have a lot of pieces and to have a fun time building something, and they get 15 or 20 pieces, and they feel cheated. And so what it did is it drove away their best customers at the time they needed them most. And Galador, you know, I checked IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, and it's just another example of how Lego went into a business it didn't understand. I looked on the IMDb, and the TV show was so bad that almost everybody who acted in it never acted in anything ever again. Right? It wasn't just bad; it killed careers. It was that bad. And of course, it wasn't very Lego-y. I mean, it was an action figure. You could snap the head off, but what fun is that? But the toys that almost killed Lego were Star Wars and Harry Potter, because Lego didn't understand the business. So think about what you'd do if you were Lego. It's the first year of the second trilogy, first year you're doing Lego Star Wars toys, 1999. They don't make enough. They don't realize how popular it's going to be. At Christmas time, in December of 1999, you can't buy it. You can't find these toys anywhere. So if you were Lego, what would you do in 2000, the next year? You'd make more, right? But they didn't understand how cyclical the demand would be. And so the demand is less, but the supply is more, and you get a whole lot of toys that aren't selling, and they go on the discount table. And I remember my son was only 4 at the time, and even he knew at that age that there was something wrong with those toys on the discount table, right? There's a stench to them, a stink to them. And so they end up with lots of extra toys. 2001 is the first Harry Potter toys, so those do very well. 2002, there's a Harry Potter movie, and there's a Star Wars movie, so that's a great year. But there's no movie from either franchise in 2003 or the first half of 2004. Sales fall off a cliff. 94% of their other products are unprofitable, and the company almost goes out of business. They have to lay off another 1,000 people. They sell off real estate. They've just opened up a new headquarters building a couple years before. They sell that and move their management team into an unused corner of the factory. They do whatever they can. They take out some emergency loans and they barely survive. But they learn some lessons from this brush with bankruptcy. And I'll tell you those lessons through just a couple of toy stories. And I'll start with this fire truck. This fire truck, I think, is the most important toy in Lego's history because it became a symbol within Lego. What happened in Lego is that as they encouraged this innovation, reach for the stars, reinvent the future, try and come up with great new play experiences, revolutionary, disruptive new play experiences, the complexity of their manufacturing and supply chain operations went through the roof. This is the number of different pieces they made. And there was a huge debate in the company. Some people were saying, we have to cut this in half. This is killing us. The costs are too high, complexity is too high. Other people, like from marketing and the product development, were saying, no, we need these pieces to do great toys. And there was a big debate. What swung the debate was that the head of IT actually went into some kits and pulled out 3 different bad guys, 8 different policemen, and 3 different chefs, and brought them into the management meeting and said, these are all different production schedules. If we run out of one head, we can't use another. We run out of one torso, we can't use another. And there's a huge cost to recreating the same thing again and again. And furthermore, the reason that designers are doing it is because they want to make them look like themselves. They want to immortalize themselves in Lego. That's why this head looks different than that head. And so that swung it. They ended up cutting the number of pieces in half. They end up adding a couple back in. But then the head of all of marketing and product development calls all 600 people that work for him into a huge room and holds up a fire truck and shows this slide. I actually got his slide. And he holds up the fire truck and he says, this is where Lego started to go bad. This was our 1997 fire truck, and it wasn't very good. But this is where we hit bottom. This is the Jack Stone, right, that only had 15 or 20 pieces. We will never do something like this again. This is who we are as a company. This is the fire truck. And what was important about this was that it was done not with that big set of pieces, but with the smaller range of pieces, the reduced number of shapes and colors. And so it became a symbol of doing more with less. Lego has a phrase, innovation flourishes when the space for it is limited. That our job as managers is to not just tell people to reinvent the future, but actually to give them constraints about timing and cost and what types of constraints they have around their design process, and demand that they get it done by the season, the time that our customers need it. And that's part of our job. And so this fire truck became a symbol that the head of marketing and product development took to all the different groups and said, okay, what's your fire truck? To the Duplo group, to the Technique group, to the Bionicles group. How can you do more with less? And so one of the lessons Lego learned was that sometimes constraints actually make more innovation happen, not less, and more profitable innovation. This was a very successful and very profitable product for Lego. But Lego learned a very valuable story from this toy, Bionicle. Bionicle, again, was this very fierce-looking, non-Lego-looking character. It was an action figure, but it was a buildable action figure. And there was a backstory about these heroes that wash up on the island of Matanui and they have adventures. And every year there's a different set of characters and there's a different story. And if you don't get those characters in, say, 2003, on December 31st of 2003, they're gone. And January 1st of 2004, there's a different set of characters. And so the collectible aspect of it made Bionicles tremendously successful. Bionicle was the toy that saved Lego. Without the revenues of this one successful toy in those dark years of 2003 and 2004, Lego would not be in business today. But Bionicle also taught Lego a very valuable lesson about disruption. Because what they found is that if you sell books, if you sell comic books, and the most popular young adult fiction in the US for many years was the Bionicle books. The most popular comic books in the world were the DC comics about Bionicles. But also, if you watch the direct-to-video movies, if you play the video games, kids would get more involved with the story, not less. And they'd want more boxes of plastic pieces, not less. That the digital didn't disrupt the physical, it complemented it. It deepened kids' involvement with the story and made them realize you needed all four of the good guys to do battle with all four of the bad guys. And so made them want to get all those different characters. And that's a very powerful lesson. Going out and really understanding what your customer cares about and then helping them to get more value from your product. That's the essence of what Lego learned. And that changed everything about Lego's development process. This is Ninjago. Ninjago was Lego's very successful product from 2011. And the way Lego develops products now doesn't start with a box of bricks anymore. It starts with a story. They show these panels, these comics, these cartoons, one at a time to a group of kids. They just get a bunch of 7-year-olds together. And they say, tell me a story about what's happening. And sometimes kids will tell, just a couple stories. Other times kids will get really excited and they'll start jumping up and down and running around and telling one story after another. And Lego has this great expression, there's only two groups of honest people in the world, kids and drunks. Kids will never lie to you about whether something's fun or not. And this picture in particular really got kids excited, this whole idea of ninjas doing battle. And so Lego has become much more humble now about their ability to predict. The old Lego would have taken this back and developed toys with ninjas. The new Lego, what they do is they go out and they show the kids more pictures. So what kind of ninja battle is it? Is it ninjas with dragons and where are we now? Is it ninjas with dragons and lizards, or is it ninjas on motorcycles, and is it more modern with helicopters? And so they are much more humble about their ability to predict. They ask the kids. They don't go to the kids to invent it, but they ask the kids to tell them which is more interesting, more exciting. And then, they had this big debate. Like, if ninjas were the good guys, who are the bad guys? And so they went out to the kids again and said, okay, so ninjas are the heroes. Who would the ninjas fight? Who would you think, by the way? Would you think it would be the robots or the lizards? It turns out that 7-year-olds had a very strong opinion about this. They saw that ninjas were real historical figures. So it couldn't be something like monkeys or lizards or robots. It had to be skeletons. The 7-year-old feedback was very clear. It had to be skeletons. And so they came up with this whole toy about ninjas battling skeletons, and there's toys, and they came up with a game called Spinjitzu, where you spin one against the other, and one pops off, and there's a winner and a loser, which some kids really like, the competition aspect. And they came up with a cartoon show, a very good one. It's in its 9th season now. There was a video game. There was comic books. There's events at the Lego store. It's hard to read, but it says, calling all ninjas, come down for a Spinjitzu tournament. And all this made the box of bricks irresistible. None of these is very, very big, disruptive, or revolutionary, but all of them together make that box of bricks irresistible. And we see this now with the latest from Lego. The Lego Batman movie came out just a few months ago. And in it, they take this character of Lego Batman, and he has all kinds of adventures in this Lego brick world. And of course, it's not just a movie that comes out. And by the way, why would a movie for kids come out in February? Why would a movie for kids come out in February? Think about it. I talked to the producer of the movie, and I asked, did you want the movie to come out in February? And he said, no, we would have made, he didn't say it outright, but he clearly wanted it to come out at Christmas time. That's when kids are on vacation. There's more opportunities to see the movie. But they moved it to February because Lego doesn't make money from the movie so much as it makes it from the brick. In the US, the Lego pays about $1 a pound, $2 a kilo, for ABS plastic and sells it to us for $100 a kilo, from $2 a kilo to $100 a kilo. That's their business model. And they don't need help selling bricks at Christmas time. They need help selling bricks in February. So that's when the movie came out. And so, of course, there's a dozen toys on the shelf in February. There is comic books, there's video games, there is events at the Lego store, there's merchandise like an alarm clock and a batarang, and there's Happy Meal toys at McDonald's, there's apps on the web, and all this made the box of bricks irresistible. And so this is what has led Lego to its recent success. That in fact, none of this is very disruptive or revolutionary, but surrounding a box of bricks with a set of complementary innovations. It's not innovation inside the box. It's not innovation outside the box. It's innovation around the box. It's surrounding your core product with complementary innovations that increase the value of that product to your customer. And the best metaphor I've heard for this approach to innovation is that it's like dating, not fighting. That if we think about innovation as fighting our competitor, then we're looking at what features their product or service has, what does it cost, what capabilities do they offer, and we're always trying to match that and do better. If instead we start to think about innovation as dating our customer, think about when you met that special person in your life. You wanted more of a relationship with that person. Well, then you spend time trying to understand what are their hopes and dreams and fears and passions, and how can I become a bigger part of their life? How can I connect to them in more different ways? That's the way we should think about innovation. And that's what Lego learned from its brush with bankruptcy, is that they couldn't offer just a box of bricks. They had to understand the play experience and support that play experience much more. That, there's a big difference between sufficient and necessary. That it wasn't sufficient for Lego just to offer a box of bricks, but it was necessary. When Lego went away from the brick, we went away from Lego. We had no reason to do business with Lego. When they went back to the brick and surrounded it with complementary innovations, that's when they began to see some success. And the way to think about this, the first question, if you want to try this approach, and I urge you, again, I'm not saying that this is the only approach to innovation. I think you have to be thinking about those big disruptive changes in your industry. You always want to be improving your core product. But I think everybody who is an innovation leader should have this tool in their tool belt. You can't just have a hammer. You've got to have a hammer and a screwdriver and a wrench. And so the first question is almost a question of where are you not going to innovate? What is your brick? You may have a whole range of bricks. You may have a whole set of crown jewels in your company that you want to build around. But it's that thing that you did yesterday that you're going to do today that you're going to do tomorrow. It's that product or service that your customers depend on you for. It's what made your company what it is today. But then you have to think more broadly. What's the promise to your customer? What is the equivalent of that play experience for Lego? And really understanding how your customers get value from the product. What are they trying to do with your product? And then you come to the creative part of the process of trying to really deliver those innovations and bring them to the market. And that's, it almost starts with the question of where are you not going to innovate? And, as I've studied this, I found a lot of companies are using the same approach to innovation. Then, in fact, I'll tell you just two quick stories. One of Sarah Robb O'Hagan. So Sarah Robb O'Hagan took over Gatorade back in 2008. And Gatorade was suffering in 2008 because a Coca-Cola-backed product called Powerade was discounting very heavily and was, in fact, taking market share away from Gatorade. Now, what do you think Gatorade did in response? Well, just like Lego, they put out more and more different flavors. They had a low-calorie version. They had a no-calorie version. They had flavors like Fierce and X Factor, whatever those are. And, basically, every time they added a product, sales didn't go up much, but costs went up much. And so they continued to lose share to Powerade and continued to lose profitability. So what Sarah Rabohagen and her team did is they went back to the customer, the core customer, the serious athlete. And what they found when they really looked at how that customer was using the product is that it was much more than just hydration during an athletic event. And so one of the first things that she found is that, in fact, those serious athletes didn't care about all these flavors. So she cut way down on the number of flavors, cut back on the no-calorie version completely, and just concentrated on the most popular flavors. But then when she went out and tried to understand what serious athletes were doing, what she found is that serious athletes did a lot of things before, during, and after an athletic event. Before, they'd have carbohydrates, energy chews, or things like that. Sometimes some would eat candy. And then during, they'd use Gatorade to hydrate, to stay hydrated. And then after, they'd have things like protein shakes or protein bars to recover. And so Sarah created this thing called the G series, which surrounded the core hydration drink with complementary products so you could prime, you could prepare for an athletic event, stay hydrated during, and then recover more effectively after. And what's remarkable is that when they introduced these complementary products, and when they cut the number of drinks, sales of the drink, of just the drink, went up. One last story. GoPro. So GoPro stumbled in recent years, but of course they had a very great initial 5 years. And GoPro, they started this approach right from the beginning. You know, they realized that people were using these cameras to capture their greatest adventures. And so what they did is they not only came out with camera, but a full set of mounts. You can mount a GoPro to your guitar, you can mount it to your surfboard, you can mount it to your dog. They have mounts for everything. But they also have a smartphone app to control it. They have desktop software so that you can take your great adventures and put them to music. They have a social media site, one of the most popular on the web, and they'll actually pay you if you have a great video. And they even have a little tool. I love this one. They have a tool that lets you adjust you can see, there it is, the tool in the upper left, they had it's a wrench to tighten the bolts, but you can see it also is a bottle opener so that you can celebrate your great adventure once it's done. So all this has led to a 5-year, 90% growth for GoPro. Now, Sony was the dominant player in video cameras, and Sony wasn't going to let this go by easily. And so Sony came out with a better video camera in 2015. It had more pixels, it had image stabilization, it had noise reduction, it had a video remote, it had a GPS, and it cost 1/3 less than GoPro. But Sony wasn't competing in the same way. You know, GoPro, of course, had all of these complementary innovations that made the product more valuable, whereas Sony really just developed a better camera. And so if you look, GoPro sells 7 times more video cameras than Sony, and 7 times more action cameras than Sony, and 50% more video cameras. Right? Because, and think about it from the perspective of the development team in Tokyo, right? So say you were in charge and your management comes to you and says, develop a better action camera than than GoPro. And you and Sony do that. You successfully create a better action camera and you lose in the market. Whose fault is that? It's not the fault of the team. It's the fault of the management who didn't realize the terms of competition in that industry had changed. It wasn't about a better product. It was about a better portfolio of products. And so GoPro did what Lego did. It thought carefully about the product, but also about the promise. And I deliberately use a different term than brand. You know, the promise is about how to get value from that product. And then thought carefully about, you know, what are the innovations that will help deliver on that promise, and how do we bring those innovations to market? And so this is an innovation inside the box, and it is an innovation outside the box, but it's innovation around the box. And I urge you as innovation leaders or future innovation leaders to experiment with this, to try the Lego approach. And that's the lesson of Lego. So thank you.